original plan was to simply moderate this panel, but Leah thought that it would be fitting for me to share my why Baldwin matters to me. And so that's where we'll start. So though I never met him, he's played an inestimable role in my personal and professional evolution. As a newly declared English major in my junior year of college, I'd never read any African American writers. English class in high school in the late 70s, early 80s meant Romeo and Juliet, Of Mice and Men, The Old Man and the Sea, and if you were lucky, a poem by Emily Dickinson or a short story by Flannery O'Connor. Even in college literature classes that I'd taken thus far, American literature meant Faulkner, Fitzgerald, Eliot, O'Neill, total monochrome in terms of color, gender, sexual orientation. I recall being especially excited, jubilant even, my senior year in college in a course entitled The Major American Novel, where the professor distributed the syllabus, and lo and behold, there was Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. But alas, it was not meant to be. We simply had run out of time. And Brother Ellison ended up in the course dustbin. When I mentioned to my 20th century British literature professor that I was interested in African American authors, he admitted to being woefully unacquainted with them, though he'd heard of James Baldwin and his famous novel, Go Tell It to the Mountain. Unbeknownst to him, with that name and slightly mangled title, my professor provided a slither of Black literary light in my literary re-education. On my next visit to my family, I hurried to our World Book Encyclopedia collection, and anybody under 50, I'm sure will have to Google encyclopedia, and pulled the B volume, and there he was, just a brief entry of a few words in an absolutely dreadful picture, little more than a dark spot with bulbous eyes. The thumbnail sketch noted that Baldwin's writings, quote, dealt with race and homosexuality. For a 20-year-old at a university where one of the professors had very publicly stated and written that students who looked like me didn't belong at this university, and a 20-year-old also grappling with feelings which his sanctified and largely affirming African American Methodist Episcopal Zion Church community deemed unspeakable, if not necessarily shameful or dirty, I began to fully grasp that our professor had thrown me a lifeline both personally and pedagogically. From there, I discovered in our library the novels Go Tell It on the Mountain, Another Country, Just Above My Head, or more accurately, devoured them. And in the ensuing years, I would discover that I could meet my personal literary passion and my professional aspirations. Given how deeply the church shaped both me and my literary godfather, I'll conclude with this. A prophet is not without honor, but in his own country and among his own kin and in his own house. I don't think Baldwin was ever properly honored in and by his own country, and his search for homes globally perhaps attests to this. But 37 years after his death, I'm thrilled to be a part of a centennial celebrations taking place in the US and worldwide, finally giving honor to philosopher, poet, artist, prophet James Arthur Baldwin, whose names we now all know. We're fortunate to have today a panel that spans generations and proximity to Baldwin's life and art. Ms. Tulani Salahu-Din is an educator and researcher in the African American History and Culture Museum. Underlying her work in education and public history is the belief that cross-cultural education is a prerequisite to mutual understanding, respect, and tolerance among individuals and groups. Her work in academia and museum field is integral to exhibitions designed to bridge cultural gaps and has introduced her to the works of distinguished historical and literary figures, including but not limited to James Baldwin. Ms. Salahu-Din's initial interest in Baldwin began during her tenure at Morgan State University in Baltimore, where she taught composition and African American literature, introducing students to the works of Baldwin, Toni Morrison, Chinua Achebe, and other literary and intellectual luminaries. Her interest in Baldwin continued at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, where she has served as a museum specialist in language and literature since 2010. Ms. Salahu-Din became part of a creative curatorial team that developed a multimedia exhibit on Baldwin located in the museum's Making a Way gallery. Baldwin objects and photographs that she acquired from his family are integral to this exhibit, and these materials are also highlighted in Chez Baldwin, the museum's digital exhibition she curated to explore Baldwin's life through the lens of his house in the south of France. In 2016, she had the honor of sharing her instrumental role in developing the Baldwin exhibit, where she joined a cadre of scholars at the International James Baldwin Conference in Paris. Her paper, titled The Self-Examined Life, Teaching James Baldwin Through Museum Exhibitions, illustrated how the objects, photographs, and film clips in the exhibit are organized around three broad themes: human identity, creativity, and freedom, all of which frame Baldwin's life as a literary artist and civil rights figure. Called as fine a pure prose stylist as any living writer by the Chicago Tribune Book World, Nicholas Delbanco is the Robert Frost Distinguished University Professor Emeritus of English at the University of Michigan, where he was the director of the MFA program, now the Helen Zell Writers Program, and for a quarter of a century, the Hopswood Awards. He was founding director of the Bennington Summer Writing Workshop, where he created this low residency MFA program. His prolific career includes fiction and nonfiction: Small Rain, The Writer's Trade and Other Stories, Old Scores, In the Name of Mercy, and Running in Place, Scenes from the South of France. Most recently, he's published a novel, It Is Enough, and a nonfiction volume, Why Writing Matters. In addition to this prodigious body of work, he has two forthcoming books, his 32nd and 33rd, Still Life at 80, a memoir, and Reprise, the collected stories of Nicholas Delbanco. In recognition of his writing, he's been awarded the G.S. Guggenheim Memorial Fellowship and 2 National Endowment for the Arts grants in prose fiction. He has served as chair of the National Book Awards Fiction Panel, as a judge for the Pulitzer Prize, the NEA, and Washington's own PEN/Faulkner Award. With his wife Elena, who's here as well, he divides his time between Manhattan and Cape Cod. Ray Mitchell, a sophomore English major with a concentration in creative writing. It's going to be all right. It's going to be all right, Ray. I'm right here in your corner. A sophomore English major with a concentration in creative writing here at Mason, who describes himself as an avid reader and writer, and enjoys fiction, mostly in the romance and thriller genres. They usually write realistic creative fiction, although creative nonfiction and biographical fiction have become more integrated into their works. They love learning about new perspectives, hearing opinions, and reading a wide range of writers, whether they be a world-renowned author such as James Baldwin or a 15-year-old with a dream behind a Tumblr username. So that is the intro for our panelists, and now I will attempt to sit on this high chair and hope I don't fall, and our panelists will speak.
All right, thank you, Keith, for the introduction. Unlike David, who knew Baldwin personally on an intimate level, I'm going to talk today a little bit about how I've come to know James Baldwin. So before I discuss a few reasons why Baldwin matters, before I do that, I'm going to put on my reading glasses. That'll help. Before I discuss a few reasons why Baldwin matters, I want to give a little background on how I became familiar enough with Baldwin's life and works to understand his relevance today. Before joining the museum, my familiarity with Baldwin came through reading select works by and about him, and meeting him only briefly at a public lecture he gave at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County in 1986. Since then, I've come to learn a great deal more about Baldwin through the archival materials in his collections contributed to the museum by his family. These include personal letters, legal and financial documents, postcards, and his 1965 passport documenting his international travels through 1970. Among other things, these materials reveal the unbreakable bond he had with his family, how family, his 8 brothers and sisters, his nieces and nephews, and his mother, to whom he was exceptionally close, were a source of his strength as a gifted writer pursuing the rigors and demands of his craft in such a public way. In a 1965 letter to his brother David, Baldwin mentions the, quote, unnameable, mystic, and unprecedented demands his gift imposes, suggesting to David, it is no coincidence that the word gift in German means poison. His family was also a source of hope and healing when these physical and emotional rigors took a toll on his entire being. It still amazes me that the expansive terrain Baldwin covered, both physically and intellectually, beginning around the mid-20th century when he left the United States for France at age 24, until his death at age 63. Without the benefit of technology that scholars enjoy today, internet, cell phones, etc., Baldwin spanned the continents, published in almost every literary genre, and became one of the foremost insightful public intellectuals of his times. The thoughts and ideas he espoused and the societal values that framed his life and work make Baldwin relevant to the issues of today. So 2 of those values I will talk about. Keith had mentioned the 3, freedom, identity, and creativity. But I'm going to talk about freedom and identity. These 2 values, which are universal, having relevance here and around the world, and they are enduring. They address human concerns across time. Baldwin's expression of these values through his activism, writing, speeches, relationships with other artists, and his public engagement with young people provide a sense of hope and guidance for our present moment of Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ rights, and the rights of all peoples struggling for fair treatment, equal rights, and justice in the United States and, of course, around the world. Baldwin's expression of these universal and enduring values is why he still matters. Let's talk about freedom, the first one. Baldwin's social and political activism provides an example for people today who work with intentionality toward freedom, who use their skills, knowledge, and talents to effect positive change locally, nationally, and internationally. Baldwin prided himself on being, you heard David say numerous times, a witness to the freedom movement, an astute observer and journalist during the civil rights movement, traveling throughout the South to analyze and document events around such issues as voter registration and school desegregation. But beyond being a witness, Baldwin was thoughtfully engaged in other forms of activism and was sought after to support civil rights efforts in various states. For example, on April 28, 1964, Julian Bond, serving as event coordinator for SNCC, wrote to Baldwin, inviting him to support the Freedom Summer voter registration event by taking part in efforts to meet with President Lyndon Johnson. Bond writes, "Your presence on the jury would aid our cause and lend weight to our insistence that justice and order must prevail in Mississippi this summer and always." It is highly likely that Bond had heard Baldwin speak one day prior in a public conversation with writer Robert Penn Warren, stating that, quote, "If Washington had the energy to move, to break the power of people like Senator Eastland and Russell, so the Negroes began to vote in the South, you would have made a large step forward. If Negroes could vote in this city, you would have a different state. If we get a different state in Mississippi, you would have a different country. Baldwin. Another example of Baldwin's activism, in 1968, Baldwin testified before Congress, the Committee on Education and Labor, in support of a proposed bill to establish a commission on Negro history and culture. This ultimately led to the creation of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, where I work and where many of you have visited. He, along with Betty Shabazz, played a significant role in planting a seed that came to fruition 48 years later. The message being that we may not see change in our lifetime, but if we work to plant the seeds now, we can help direct the inevitability of social and political change. The second societal value that helped to frame the life and works of James Baldwin is this issue of identity, both national identity and individual identity. Baldwin was concerned with the individual. I recall seeing a video where he said the individual is the most important thing. So we have to know who we are as individuals because we comprise the nation, the national identity. What I find most compelling about Baldwin is that underlying his work as an activist is his fundamental belief in the need for truth-telling through self-examination. In 1986 at UMBC, I mentioned earlier, where I met him for one and only time, where he spoke to a packed ballroom of nearly 2,000 people, he stated in his speech, "It is a peculiar history. We begin after so many lies." In a recent Atlantic article, Lonnie Bunch, the founding director of the museum where I work, asked the question, why is America afraid of Black history? He states that no one should fear a history that asks a country to live up to its highest ideals. Now, this question and statement are at the heart of the issue of national identity and truth-telling. To get to the heart of U.S. identity, its values, its goals, the truth of its history must be revealed and embraced. Only then can a people determine what kind of nation they want to be. Baldwin today, in the face of efforts to restrict and ban the teaching of African American history, would have continued to be a strong voice for telling the truth about America and dispelling the lies. He would firmly suggest, in the words of historian Chad Williams, that, quote, fallacies, myths, self-delusions are no longer sustainable. The nation must examine itself and face the reality of its tortured racial past and of the role of the African American freedom movement in creating pathways forward that benefited all Americans, something that is sorely overlooked. It was never a struggle for just people of African descent. Everybody benefited from the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Women, people of different religious backgrounds, the physically challenged, people with diverse sexualities. And so everyone benefited, and that again is a reality that America as a whole refuses to embrace. Still, beyond national identity, Baldwin wrote and spoke consistently about individual identity and the need for self-examination, to understand oneself as a human being first and foremost. In a letter to his youngest sister, Paula, written circa 1956, Baldwin, 32 years old then, conveys a message of personal insight to his teenage sister, a message about human identity that is relevant today to youth and adults, as well as to America in its need to embrace the truth about itself. He wrote to her saying, "I do not want you ever to care too much about what people say about you, but what you think of yourself is important. Do your best to tell the truth to yourself, no matter how painful it may be. Your life depends on it." And when I say your life, I mean the life you lead inside of you. There has never been another Paula before. Never in the entire history of the world. Think about it. And there will never be a Paula again. Never prevent yourself from doing the things that you and only you can do. And you can take that paragraph and you can replace Paula with America. You can replace Paula with America. Those words are relevant, are a relevant message applicable to both the individual and the collective of individuals who comprise the nation. In 1960, speaking at a writers' symposium at San Francisco State, Baldwin offered these words about a shared national and individual identity. Quote, "A country is only as strong as the people who make it up. And the country turns into what the people want it to become. Now this country is going to be transformed, and it will not be transformed by an act of God, but by all of us, you and me. I didn't believe that we could afford any longer to say it is entirely out of our hands. We made the world we're living in, and we have to make it over." And that line reminds me of Eddie Glaude's book, Begin Again. We may have to begin again. Fundamentally, Baldwin matters today because his writings strike at the core of what it means to be human. The search for identity, the need for self-examination. Being human transcends time and place, social and political and cultural movements. Wherever I go, there I am. A realization involving introspection and self-reflection. Baldwin has written quite a bit about his own journey across the Atlantic, dragging with him the trauma of his experience in the racialized society of the United States, and getting overseas and realizing I'm still grappling with these internal things. Wherever I go, there I am. Further, the complex social and political issues of Baldwin's time remain with us. His example as a thinker, activist, and passionate literary artist, unbound by ideological labels and strictures, is yet another reason why Baldwin matters. And I want to end, we spoke, I wasn't even going to share this very 4-line poem that Baldwin wrote, but we were talking about the essentiality of love. And I just said, I'm going to keep it on here because I just liked it, but it wasn't really relevant to my talk, but it is relevant to that conversation we had about the essentiality of love. He said, love warms, takes many forms, is always strange, but trust the change. 1967, unpublished poem by James Baldwin. Thank you very much.
I don't know if it's obvious, I'm a little nervous. Hi. Okay. So, my name's Ray. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a sophomore here at George Mason. I wrote a little thing. I remember when I was in Professor Mitza's creative writing class, we sat down at one point and we were trying to figure out what genre I wrote, and I had no idea. She kind of helped me figure out that it was some type of biographical fiction, autobiographical fiction, and I think that might be what this is a little bit. We might also have to sit down after this too, though, so I'll also talk about it a little after. So the title is a work in progress. It's called, as of now, Solace Looks Different. 3 walls and 2 doors. I'm only 20 and I know nothing. I have been nowhere. I've met no one. When I was 16, I thought I knew everything I needed to know. Been everywhere I'd need to be, met everyone I needed to meet. So why, 4 years later, do I feel so empty, so alone? I was happy. This time last year, I was happy. When the only thing to give you comfort is the ugly, unreasonably multicolored carpet, empty box you carried leftovers from a volunteer event in, and balls of yarn from your mother's blanket you still haven't made, things seem really dark. I was in that position, enclosed between 3 walls and 2 doors. They open down the middle, the 2 doors, and on the other side of them is someone I don't recognize. Someone I show to Professor Metza, someone that emails Professor Clark, someone that has multiple jobs and can take on the world. There's a crack between those 2 doors where they don't meet all the way. When I sit against the back wall, the longest of the 3, after reorganizing the spots of the old takeaway box and unused yarn, I lose myself, and all I can do is look through that crack. I see the pole to my bed, one of the legs that keep me about 5 feet off the ground while I contemplate how I'm going to be my most authentic self. I didn't realize authentic had to be through and through. I didn't realize it had to be always. I didn't realize it wasn't planned. Sometimes I don't lay on my bed. I don't dip into the mattress topper and toss around until my back has cracked just enough to allow relaxation to seep through. Sometimes I attempt to seek solace in another place, under my bed. I can see it directly to the right of the leg keeping the mattress suspended. The blanket from what seems to be a rival school. No matter how much I love and support my school, I love and support my brother more. I have a bit of an obsession with soft things, soft, warm things, if you will. So my collection is piled high with different hobbies and interests littering the fabrics. None of them are big enough to cover me, so I use them as backup blankets. Maybe my pillowcase is in the washer, maybe my best friend is visiting, keeping me company for the night. I can only see it because I am a mess. All of my laundry either on the floor waiting for the hamper to be ready, in the hamper waiting to be taken down, or in a machine. I see the clothes scattered throughout the small scope of my view, although it blurs rather quickly, leaving the purple hue, forcing me to take a break from this paralyzing study I found myself in and cry. How thin were these walls again? I remember when I was having a bad day last, I turned to the shower. I sang my little heart out. I just let the hot water rinse away anything I didn't want, only to keep scrubbing what I thought the world didn't want. When I stepped out of the shower, I didn't want to have to hide. I got a new shoe rack for Christmas. Even though I didn't have any more space, I kept bringing shoes home and I needed a solution. My roommate always kept her side of the room so clean. I needed a solution. I felt bad that a part of me that was usually kept so hidden was on full display to someone that has done nothing but be my rock this academic year. I'm a mimicker at heart. I don't do it to make fun of people, nor do I do it to hide myself. It's just a part of who I am. For example, volume. I have to have my volume in multiples of 3. Maybe it's at 12, maybe it's at 15. Sometimes if it needs to be higher, it'll be 27 or even 30. It'll always be divisible by 3 because that's what my best friend does. So when I saw how she kept her floor spotless and her desks organized, her bed made, and her life together, I was excited. I had everything going for me. I had a great job, classes I liked, and my room was clean. I switched the setup of the room. I took creative liberties, decorated my walls. All of my anime posters were up. I had my purple butterfly lights strung across my wall, curving in places I don't think they even knew they could. And my vacuum, I'm sure, had never felt so happy and loved before. In a religion my mom told me about, happiness comes about when someone or something is completing a task they're meant to complete in this life. A spoon is happiest when it's being used to eat soup or feed a baby mushed peas. A bowl, in my case, is happiest when there's bleach and developer mixed in and gloves invading the sides, scraping the concoction to give me something else to smile with my friends about. A vacuum is happiest when it's used to eat the crumbs off the ground or ridding the couch of all the dreaded pet hair with its special appendage. I wonder then if that's why I get so sad when I'm in my room. When I have a conversation with someone, if they're having a bad day or just have a lot of weight on their chest, suddenly I become a whole human heavier. I physically and emotionally feel heavier when someone else has a hard day. At the same time, something my short-term memory appreciates is how happy talking to someone in a good mood will make me. My smile, so bright and genuine, it doesn't stop at my mouth, but instead reached past my eyes, lighting up my entire face. My cheekbones so high and defined, the chub that followed me from every part of my life, not stopping them from garnering all the attention they desired. They hurt so much, I tried to force myself to have a straight face, a frown even. I couldn't do it. No matter how hard I tried in some cases, I was just that happy. Taking the logic from the unnamed religion, I think about every time I feel a tear fall from the corner of my eye, as well as the logic from my empathetic path of life I've been walking for so long. Maybe I don't just cry for no reason. The vacuum in my room has been sitting in the same corner for the past 2 months, at least. The fridge against my wall, empty and unplugged because I haven't been grocery shopping. My desk is probably completely depressed because I never do my schoolwork on it. I put things on it that a desk isn't supposed to hold, like my dirty clothes after a particularly rough day, like my wadded up tissues when I'm sick and can't reach the trash bin, like my pillows and stuffed animals when I desperately need to wash away any and everything that could possibly possess pollen. Allergies, anyone? They're really kicking me. None of these are what these things were meant for. None of these things that surround me are happy, and I can't help but wonder if that is maybe why I found myself once again retreating to where I don't have to be seen. There is no light, just a small part where the two doors don't meet all the way, where I can look out and see all the chaos and unrest among what is supposed to be my solace. What was my solace? I don't do good with change, which is why I think I struggle a lot with labels, because when something changes, then I have to look at the wrong label and understand whether or not it's wrong and whether or not I should change it. My bed was once my solace. Then it was under my bed. Now I can only seem to find this label in the confines of 3 walls and 2 doors that don't quite meet all the way. Maybe my bed still brings just as much solace as my closet does. Maybe it just does it for someone else. Maybe it just looks different now. Thank you. I didn't time that. I'm sorry. I'm supposed to be up here for about 12 to 15 minutes, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I wrote that because I have been stuck all semester. This semester has been really hard for me, and reading James Baldwin and talking about James Baldwin and enjoying James Baldwin, it allowed me to move forward. With this piece, I was able to take a step forward that I hadn't been able to for a while. So yeah, that's all I'm saying.
As you can tell from my decision to use the stairs and bring a cup of water with me, I'm a member of that vanishingly small generation who actually knew James Baldwin, and I want to follow principally where David so eloquently led, with a kind of memoir about our time together in the south of France. Because I am a writer, and the definition is one who writes, I've written this and intend mostly to read it. More than half my life ago, I was a near neighbor of James Baldwin. We'd met in the winter of 1970, briefly, in Istanbul. I was working on the screenplay for the film of my first novel, and the director knew Baldwin, and Baldwin was in town. We had a drink together and went to Fortune and Men's Eyes, a play he directed in Turkish. Not knowing Turkish, I was less than enthralled, and the meeting didn't matter much, and the evening was a blur. The following year, Elena, who's with us in this room, happily, and I moved to the south of France as newlyweds, and we ran into Baldwin in Cannes. Standing on line at the American Express office, in what seemed like an interminable forward progress, I recognized the writer behind me. We shook hands. Then I said that the director who'd introduced us would be passing through, and maybe we could get together for a meal or drink. I was surprised by his alacrity. We went to his house the next day. Elena's daybook for our final 10 days in Provence lists 5 such occasions: dinner at his house, at ours, at a restaurant in Saint-Paul-de-Vence, talks and walks. He was completing No Name in the Street. He was planning to remain in France and would do so for years. His open-handed welcome, his insistence that we call as soon as we came back meant much, as did his cheerful certainty that we would return. In 1973, when we settled again in the house in Provence, Baldwin treated us like long-lost friends. He'd established a work pattern and an entourage. He had a chauffeur large enough to double as a bodyguard, a cook, a companion named Philippe, who acted as a kind of secretary-manager, and various others whose function is less easy to describe. There would be a dancer or painter in tow, old lovers or associates from some project in the offing or projected or long past. They came from Italy, America, Algeria, Tunisia, Finland. Brothers and nephews passed through, principally that brother called David, which is why he said on your first meeting that he liked the name. We were rarely less than 6 at table, and more often 10. The cook and the femme de ménage came and went. The men stayed on. They treated their provider with a fond deference, as if his talent must be sheltered from invasive detail, the rude, importunate matters of fact. They answered the phone and the door. They sorted mail. There was an intricate hierarchy of rank, a jockeying for position that evoked nothing so much as a Provençal court. Who was in favor, who out, who had known Jimmy longer or better or where, who would do the shopping or join him in Paris for the television interview or help with a book jacket photo. He was working again on a novel, if Beale Street could talk. Baldwin drank scotch, we drank wine. I've not as yet described the quality of kindness in his manner, the affection he expected and expressed. His face is widely known. That dark glare, broad nose, those large protruding eyes, those close-fitting cap of curls and starting to go white. But photographs can't convey the mobile play of feature, the intensity of utterance, the sense he could contrive to give that attention matters, and gesture can count. There was something theatrical in Jimmy's manner, and it grew automatic at times. He would embark on what seemed a tirade, a high-speed compilation of phrases that clearly had been phrased before, a kind of improvised lecture spun out of previous speech. He stared at you unblinkingly. You couldn't turn away. He wore expensive jewelry and fingered it, talking. He smoked. He had been holding center stage for years. You shifted in your seat. You said, "Yes, but," and he raised his imperious manicured hand. Dialogue for Baldwin was an interrupted monologue. He would yield the platform neither willingly nor long. He could speak incisively on a book he hadn't read. But again and again he impressed me with his canny ranging, his alert intelligence. In the literal sense, I was no longer a student, but Baldwin remained a teacher, at least as much as, from his own early training, a preacher. "Understand me," he would say. "It's important you understand." And it was important, and in that mesmeric presence you thought you understood. My pleasure in our meetings is easily explained. Here was the spokesman of his generation in color, speaking directly to me. That he took my opinions seriously, that he read and respected my work, or appeared to, that he wanted us with him as often as possible, all this was flattering. When we parted late at night, Jimmy said, "See you two tomorrow." If we came for lunch instead, he urged us to stay on for dinner. When a friend passed through St. Paul, he would insist we meet. Why he wanted to spend time with us is less clear. Each friendship partakes of the reciprocal trade agreement, and I can only speculate as to Baldwin's motives in the trade. He was the most sociable of solitaries. Though constantly attended and attended to, he held himself apart. He wanted to hear news from home. Elena had worked several years in a rehabilitation agency for drug addicts in New York, whose clientele was largely black. She moved easily through his old streets. Though almost without exception the single woman in his house, and in a party of a dozen men, she was given pride of place. She sat at his right hand. They liked each other, I believe, with unfettered, immediate liking. She treated him with just the right admixture of impatience and respect. They embraced each other, meaning it. They huddled in corners together. There was nothing exclusionary about his attitude to women. Though surrounded by adoring boys, he was always a family man. I mattered to him, I suppose, as a practitioner of the shared trade. He told me he was starved for the chance to talk books, for a discussion, say, of Henry James with someone who had read it. We talked the way most writers do, in a kind of shorthand and sign language. We asked each other always how the work had gone that day, how this paragraph was progressing with that character and scene. Jimmy's acolytes believed the process sacramental, as if behind his study door strange rituals took place. He would shut himself away at midnight and somehow produce an object to which accrued money and fame. They had little sense, it seemed, of how much it was costing him to keep them all in style, or the anxious private wrangling in the watches of the night. His acclaim had diminished of late, and he knew I knew it. This is something we might actually talk about. During that period in the south of France and in exile, he was considerably less consequential and had been more challenged, as David suggested, than is the case now. His present consequence easily outstrips that with which he was wrestling and wrangling back then. The alchemy of which his friends were confident was less mysterious to me and therefore more compelling. He worked at continual risk, and I was moved by his intensity, his struggle with a form that had come to seem elusive. Beale Street is not as finely honed as Go Tell It on the Mountain or Giovanni's Room. That Baldwin had been consequential to a multitude of readers made all this more poignant. He had made himself the benchmark to be passed. Much of what I knew of the plight of Black Americans I had learned from reading him, and what sometimes seemed like paranoia could be argued as flat fact. The assassination of Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, George Jackson, the named and nameless legion of the near and distant dead, his own impending 50th birthday, the sickness of a beloved friend and mentor, the painter Buford Delany, all weighed heavily that winter. This face, he'd say, and frame it with his slender, glinting fingers. Look at this crazy face. In the early 1970s, Richard Nixon reigned unchallenged. The Watergate scandal was building, but the hearings hadn't yet begun. Each day brought more darkness to light, but a smoking gun or upheaval in the political affair. We rushed out for the paper and listened to the radio daily, but a smoking gun or upheaval in the political affairs of France could trigger no equivalent concern. One sign of national allegiance is the reaction to political scandal. We waited like literal exiles for the summons to return. The French took presidential corruption for granted, but we were transfixed. Although it curdled into scorn, we discussed America with the fervor of the unrequited lover. We went for walks or dawdled over drinks. We visited each other often. Hey baby, what's up? Hey darling, where you been? Often and often those months. Elena and I had been at his house in Saint-Paul-de-Vence 2 or 3 times in a row. It was our turn to invite the Baldwin clan. We did so one Thursday for lunch. They said they would come happily. They were 7, maybe 9. The 2 members of the party I remember as men passing through were a dancer called Bernard and a publisher named Willie. The former was lean, lithe, beautiful, and black. He had danced at the Folies Bergère. The latter was mountainous white. We'd been warned about his appetite by Baldwin's cooks days before. Willie was a voracious eater who'd sent her to the market 3 times that afternoon. Elena planned a Navarin. We made an extra pot. A Navarin, though simple, takes time to prepare. We started the previous day. We peeled turnips and carrots and leeks. We cubed the lamb and browned it, then fashioned the bouquet garni. Our landlady knocked. She was hoping we might join her tomorrow for lunch. And there were people she thought we should meet. Lilo Rosenthal was 80 years old. She owned the property of which we occupied the gatehouse, and she was being generous to her youthful tenants. But we made our excuses inviting her in, as she could see we too were preparing a meal. We'd be unable to join or invite her, for we owed a friend a thank you Navarin. I remember not naming his name. Part of this was inverse snobbery, a distaste for glitter by association, and partly the suspicion that had Lilo known Baldwin was coming, we should have had to invite her. There would have been water and oil. At any rate, she told us she hoped we would take in our wash. It hung on the clothesline outside. She intended to walk by La Petite Maison. I think I explained this. We were in a little gatehouse next to a large villa that this woman owned and a bunch of olive trees. She intended to walk by La Petite Maison and let her friends take photographs. They were passionate photographers. Her friends were distinguished, she said. They were the last of the Habsburgs and the last of the Hohenzollerns, respectively. Or perhaps they were the last of the Schleswigs and Holsteins, or collateral branches instead. In any cases, they were old and distinguished and wouldn't appreciate the laundry on our line. She hoped we would ready the house. We promised. We made the second Navarin, or an extra half dozen bottles from the cave, brought 3 additional boules from the baker, and waited for Jimmy to come. He himself didn't drive. He had, however, purchased a brand new Mercedes, dark brown and substantial, just short of stretch limousine size. His driver would be working that day, he had assured me, and he was bringing Bertrand, Darrow, Philippe, Billy, Willie, and Bernard. At the appointed hour, we were ready. A car came. The day was overcast. What pulled into the parking space between our gatehouse and the villa was not Jimmy's Mercedes, but an ancient gray Renault. It was followed funereally by a deux chevaux. I take it that those of you who don't know these models, they're little, they're old, they're gray, they're broken, they're French. It was followed funereally by a deux chevaux. Lila Rosenthal appeared. Her guests emerged. They were slow and small and bent. The process of arrival took some time. The doors opened, faltered, closed. The last of the Habsburgs and the last of the Hohenzollerns wore dark suits and carried cameras and advanced with umbrellas and canes. They shuffled off together to their hostess's house. As soon as they were out of sight, we heard another car. The deep-throated growl of gears, the high hum of power and harness, the trumpeting bravura of the horn, and Baldwin's Mercedes roared up. It spat the raked gravel, it rocked on its brakes, it fairly pirouetted in the southern sun. 4 doors flung wide in unison, our company had come. They were dressed for the occasion grandly. They wore boaters and foulards. Their boots gleamed. Bernard especially was splendid. He emerged twirling his scarf and waist sash of pink silk. He did a few dance steps and flung his hat high and extended his hands for applause. We applauded. Jimmy embraced us, we him. The chauffeur wasn't happy with the switchbacks of the entry drive. They're badly banked, he said. He had brought his lunch along and elected to stay with the car. He stood, arms folded, glowering down through the olive groves. He was Danish, thick and stolid and impervious to charm. What a charming place, the publisher proclaimed. We piloted them in. This wasn't easy. They swarmed. They raced to the crest of the meadow and walked tiptoe along the rim of the irrigating cistern that doubled as a pool. They approved of the view. They clattered through our little house, exclaiming at the style of it, posing on the bedroom balcony. Give me the simple life, they chorused. Let's have la vie en rose. Philippe had brought flowers. He garlanded Elena, Darrow, Jimmy, Willie, and Bernard. We emptied 4 bottles of wine by the time we settled to eat. The Navarin was a success. The publisher, Willie, approved. Audibly he sighed, sitting back on the banquette and rolling up his sleeves. Which pot's for me? He asked. There were olives and pâté. There was much laughter, celebration, conversation, praise for the salads and bread. The dining room could barely contain us. We rolled about the table like a litter of puppies, suckling, jostling, slicing sausages and cheese and fruit and cake. A shadow appeared at the window. I looked up. Lila Rosenthal was outside by the car. She and her 4 companions were inching up to the house. They had their cameras at shoulder level focusing, and it pained them, clearly, to approach. We must have looked to them like Spengler's nightmare realized, the decline of the West. The beaming black man at the center, the lithe array around him, the voluminous white man with loaves in his hands, the young hosts plying everyone with wine, the pyramid of bottles, the ruckus of festivity, the Mercedes being polished. All this was hard to focus on or frame. I could see Lilo explaining. I do not know how she explained. There was no laundry, however. They circled warily. We did not invite them in. They moved to the back of the house. Thank you.